Welcome back to another episode of the Mana Daily Podcast. I haven't posted it yet, but I will be posting it probably by Monday-ish. I'll probably be prepping tonight and Sunday. The last session that we did, reading from the book 4,000 Years of Christmas, A Gift from the Ages by Earl W. Count, and Alice Lousa Count. I'm assuming that's either his wife or daughter. You guys seem to be enjoying it last time, so again, I'll read a chapter. They're incredibly short. And then we can have like a little discussion of additional things and whatnot. I think it was Renee. uh, she reneged. Sorry. Renee was the one who suggested that we do this as a topic because I was pitching several for the holiday season, as it were, just so we have a little bit more ammunition when we're trying to explain the origins of things. As I said often before, there's Bible study, then there's understanding anthropology. That just is the area that I'm emphasizing on so that it can make it a little bit more applicational to what we're doing today. As I've been trying to summarize it, asking why they did back in the day helps us asking why we do the things today, right? Because otherwise it just becomes a tradition, it becomes a habit, and when you don't understand where things come from, well, you fall into the thing of forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. It's traditions of men doing Kabbalah and not even knowing that you're doing Kabbalah. So, anyways, Melissa is going to be listening as a sideline participant, which is totally fine. So I'll be mainly interacting with Millie and her husband here. And I will also be waiting for Renee to be joining us in about 15 minutes, allegedly. How you guys doing?
Good.
Now, Millie's a little bit sick.
Yeah,
I'm not.
definitely have been a little sick lately,
Did you have the
but
COVIDs?
I know it was just the cold going around.
Yeah, there's a lot of people getting a cold up here as well.
Mhm.
And I'm over here just like, you know what? I'm just gonna stay in seclusion, have my organic hot spicy honey to help clear up anything that might be staggering.
Don't stay away. You don't want to get it.
Pretty much. Pretty much. All right. That is so good. I'm sorry. I am so thirsty right now. Anyways, without any further ado, uh, any review questions from last week before we start? Cool beans. I'll just start. Do you guys bring a notepad or anything? Because I don't want to just seem like I'm just reading. As like you could tune in, just listen to the session as opposed to just listening to me read. I know Renee takes notes, but again, that's what everybody. If you're tuning in, if you see something like this, I would like to start doing excerpt readings a little bit more in the future. I'm not sure if that'll be a thing, if that people are interested, but I know like Melissa right now, she just wants to tune in and listen. Maybe that would actually be beneficial for everybody because I don't have time to read a book. But as well, it's not the typical book reading because I would add my own additional 2 cents to what I'm reading aloud. Anyways, without any further ado, a mother and child in quest of a birthday. When was Jesus born? No one knows. December 25th is no more than a historical date of his birth than it is for any other order of things. The Christian chose it to be his birthday, only several centuries after he had lived and died. The earliest Christians were not interested in Jesus' birthday, but by the 4th century they had become very much interested. How this came about is the story of a soil growing. Christmas is a seed that sprouted in that soil. It sprouted when the Christians at last turned their eyes upon Jesus, the infant, and his mother Mary. There never would have been a Christmas as we know it without the Madonna and child. The Jesus whom, from the early gospel accounts, walked among the people and taught and blessed them, he loved small children. There is a gospel story that says that once some adults brought their children to them that they might know him, but his disciples would not have that so, and they stood in his way. Jesus was displeased at this and said, "Let the children come to me. Do not stand in their way, for the kingdom of God belonged to such as these." Over the years that followed Jesus' death, the Christians tended to lose sight of him as the refuge of those who labor and heavy laden. What mattered most to them was that at any moment he would reappear to be the stern but righteous judge of all humankind. The world was beginning anew with a day of wrathful judgment. To people who thought this way, the date of Jesus' Jesus' physical birth could not matter. To celebrate it would seem to be pointless and at worst an evil thing. By the 3rd century, however, many people were coming to the notion that his birthday should be observed, if only they could be sure when that was. Yet, in 245 AD, the great church father Origen declared it to be a sin to think of keeping the birthday of Christ, as though he were a king pharaoh. Many early Christians refused to believe so a divine being could have been born at all, and they invented ingenious ways to explain away the gospel stories. Now, that being plugged outside, that leads a little bit into the Gnosticism that Jesus wasn't actually a man, and then it goes into all these other theories and stuff like that. So that's kind of what they're hinting at here, but not going into greater detail. Although we cannot plunge into the arguments church, but the church finally arrived at the conclusion that made Christmas possible. For very briefly, the steps are these. In some ways, the church was sure Christ was divine, but how? If he was divine, could he also be human? Could he be both divine and human without having his divineness sullied by his humanness? The tradition of the Gospels claimed him to be the Messiah of the Jewish prophecy, whose birth should be from the line of King David. But the authoritative were the Gospels, and just what did they mean? Now, this is kind of where I'm emphasizing Christ as God's word made flesh. So basically, if you were a person by your word actually has substance. And thus, this is the beauty of Christ, right? God can actually be among the people via his son because his word is actually true. Does that make sense when I just phrased it? Or should I elaborate a little bit further? Okay, I'm not sure because I know that's a big concept to grasp. So yes, it is God, but at the same time, it's his word. His word is so powerful it becomes its own entity and being and can be separate, but at the same time, it's breathed from the mouth of God. That's again, as opposed to going through loins, comes from the mouth, right? Ba pa 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 pa. If the divine nature cannot partake of the human nature without being sullied, and Jesus was divine, then either the Gospels were allegory, or at best, not to be taken literally. The true Christ, therefore, must have walked the earth unborn and not truly of the flesh. There was an opposite and widespread belief that he was born entirely and only human, but that, when at last he was baptized by John in the Jordan River, the Spirit of God descended into him, and he became divine also. If so, then this human birth still was unimportant, but his divine birth at baptism was very important. In the early church, the day of his baptism, the Epiphany of John the Baptist, was held on January 6th. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, was a great festival. Now, if you're reading into, was it Dr. Michael Heiser's work? He makes a very interesting case that Christ himself is found a lot of times in the Old Testament. It's kind of almost like a Days of Future Past thing here, or Back to the Future, where, yes, he did have a definitive time when he was born physically amongst us, right? But somehow he was able to go back in time and also represent God, whether that was when he was wrestling Jacob, whether that was when he was visiting, allegedly might be, Heiser pitches this, might have been the guy who visited Gideon in the thresher at night when he was crushing for the mill. Again, he brings all of the more scholarly Hebrew text to it. And I'm like, I think that could have some validity. Now, this baptism thing, I don't know. Maybe that's why they're saying when we did the baptism debate thing that this is why there's a necessity to as well baptize somebody because the dove represents the spirit indwelling an individual once they have made that transition of acknowledging I am now a celestial citizen, if you will, and that I'm letting my old self die in the deluge of Noah. That has a lot of symbolic power, I think. Now, whether or not that's true, I think there is merit to it. Um, Given Ark of the Covenant was kept in the Holy of Holies, and when Christ drew his final breath, he said, "Into thy hands I commit thy spirit," and the temple veil rips in two right at that moment, thus activating the gift of the Holy Spirit, not to be regulated within the Ark of the Covenant anymore, but now to indwell the saints. So maybe there is something there, and that's now what the gift of baptism grants us. So again, I don't really know. I'm just giving that for consideration of what we're reading here. And as for the January 6th thing, do you guys remember what I've covered before on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
For those folks who don't know, I just found that interesting that that ties with as well as Christ when he was an adolescent was visited by the Magi was on January 6th, and that was at Magi is the root word for MAGA. So maybe there's something to be said with all of this. Our Christmas depends upon that fact that, after severe struggle, the Church repudiated the notion that Jesus had never been born at all, and somewhat later, the idea he had become divine only at his birth. Oddly, then, the fact that we have a Christmas depends, at this critical point, upon the Christians of the second and third centuries deciding about baptism. Originally, only people who had been reached the age of discretion could be baptized. In this later time, baptism was pushed forward until it was bestowed upon infants. They, too, should have the portion in the kingdom of Christ. And the church decided that Christ had been born divine. He had not received his divinity upon his baptism. A God infant, yet a human infant as well, born of a human mother. Divinity in an infant child, God's grace in every child. The two went together. By at least the third century, Jesus' birthday was being celebrated at various times, even as late as April. January 6th was favored, since on that day, too, he was allegedly supposed to have been baptized when he had at least reached manhood. In the church of the oldest Christian nation of all, the Armenian, and it is still today, of Christmas, now we are prepared to understand one of the chief reasons why the day of baptism and the day of the Nativity were separated. And Christ's birthday became a church festival, completely in its own right. But precisely why December 25th was chosen would lead us again into a swamp. That of the queer astronomical and legendary speculations that clustered about the calendar of those early Christian centuries. At all events, it was in the East and West feast of the Nativity, which first took place on December 25th, either by 336 AD or 353 AD. It was not celebrated in Rome. Then it spread eastward until it embraced most of the entire Christian church. The thoughts of the people have been changing. This is the time in the century for which the Christians regarding Mary of the mother of Jesus in a new light. She had long been revered along with other saints and apostles, but only along with them. But now, in the fourth century, we see her emerging as the Queen of Heaven. The divine Christ led been both. Sorry, getting a sticky thing back where I want it. Mary had been done a thing which certainly no other woman had done. This, in and of itself, had set her apart from all of humanity. But there is something deeper than this bald fact. For Mary represented something that the human heart ached for, and the ache was not being solaced. The Gospels told of the Son of Man who walked in the sun and the dust roads of Palestine. And that is literally what's listed here. That's not me trying to embellish here. He healed the hurts of the people, the hurts of the body and soul. He called to himself those who labored and were heavy laden, and promised them refreshment that no earthly power could give. But his followers could not keep in mind at once this Jesus and the stern judge who sat on a throne in heaven and who would some day return in glory to deal an even-handed justice to all humankind. It was a renewal of the world in this later way, and it was the renewal of the heart in the former way which won. So the heart aches remained, but became the burden of Mary. At Chartres, France, there is a cathedral with an apse whose beauty must be seen to be believed. And here, as Henry Adams writes in Mont Saint Michael and Chartres, we see the artists meant that we should see, only the great lines, the color, and the Virgin. The Mass of the suppliants and the choir look up to the light, clear blues and reds of this great space, and feel that there is a celestial peace and beauty of Mary's nature and abode. There is heaven, and Mary looks down from it into her church, where she sees us on our knees and knows each of us by our names. There she actually is, not a symbol or in fancy, but in person, descending on her errands of mercy and listening to each and every one of us, as her miracles prove, or satisfying our prayers merely by her presence, which calms our excitement of that of the mother calms her child. She is there as a queen, not merely as an intercessor, and her power is such that it is difference between us and earthly beings as nothing. Now, what I was finding interesting is mainly when they were talking about her becoming this Queen of Heaven. Now, this is immediately a term that was should, as a Christian, I think it's in Jeremiah and a couple other books. I don't know all the passages off the top of my head. Queen of Heavens is often referred to for, hello, kitty, Astarte, Ishtar, or Ashtaroth, and Isis as well. So the fact that somebody in a Christian faith, right, if you're reading all these old texts, somehow you think it's okay to incorporate this term and bestow it and imbue it upon Mary, Christ's mother, that's a huge red flag. But again, this is what Catholicism especially has emphasized. So what happened here? I'm seeing a little bit of a merger, and it's not a coincidence that third, fourth century that this is starting to evolve because this is post Constantine. Constantine allegedly saw the symbol of the cross in the sky, and he was told that with this symbol, go forth and conquer. Oh, so you're basically telling me God says go forth and kill? Isn't that breaking one of the Ten Commandments? And the symbol of X, which connects with Mars, the god of war, X for Neon. Now, seeing a little bit of a connotation here, go forth and conquer as a Christian, quote unquote. Ha! Right? We're seeing a little bit of something here. And they were saying that the Roman legionnaires were like, that's totally fine because that connects with Mithra. We already been following him. Mithra, you say, an equivalent of Baphomet? Yeah. Interesting. Interesting stuff. Anyways. The cathedral in Chartres is the fruit for many centuries of a growing faith. The faith that was building Christmas, the same centuries and the same people who made of the birthday of divine human an infant in a beautiful and tremendous church festival, brought into being new festivals and worship of Mary, the Virgin Mother. On this late hour in history, on the eve of the millennium, it is hard for us to recapture any measure of that first fine ecstasy that came from the sudden conviction that God at last came and dwelt amongst men and women, and the world had begun anew. It was strong enough to date all of the years henceforth as BC and AD. It was more than a matter of the year to the early churchmen. Year one began with December 25th. And no matter what our creed beliefs, we can afford to pause for a moment before a sublime and a daring thought, as each of us crossed the intellect of man and women, that on one certain December 25th, God condescended to appear on earth in the guise of a human baby, of a human mother, a simple Jewish peasant woman who ushered him in under the old uh, burden of woman the world over. And in the commonplace where, in the Near East, many peasant babies were and still are ushered into the world, a stable or some other outbuilding. It is a thought that for centuries the minds and the ignorant and the educated alike have striven to comprehend. How they have striven, and in their utmost, they have realized that they have never comprehended or written in the record of the jewel-covered bambino in the manger that stands to the Italian churches at Christmas time, in the hymns of the Greek and the Latin churches, in the Ave Maria Stella, and the Stabat Mater, and Ave Maria, and the quaint fancies of the carols from Bohemia, Flanders to Tyrol, the dramatic reenacting at the Christmas time, both the church and marketplace, of the gospel stories of the Nativity, and many, many pictures of the statues of the Madonna and Child that have come down through the years tell us mightily a great thought that had seized the faith of our forebears. And I found that interesting because a lot of times markets and mints, places where they made coinage, was affiliated with pagan temples. The word church comes from Circe, which is supposed to be the daughter of Helios, the god that rode his chariot from east to west every night. Huh. Thoughts?
So is this guy advocating for Christ's
He,
birth? No, he's not. Okay.
I know immediately that it was sounding like that, but no, he's literally just giving a
Okay,
we were there, now we're
just had to
here.
check.
Yeah, from what I could tell, he doesn't seem to be an advocate for it because he's explaining all the pagan origins connected to it. So I think that'd be kind of contradictory. That he's over
Yeah,
here saying, "Well, we're doing Catholic now, blah 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 blah," but he's explaining all the pagan stuff that led to it. So I think you'd be kind of, you're
yeah,
struggling with yourself, dude. Why'd you write a book?
yeah.
Figure out yourself before you start explaining it to others.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so here we go to the next chapter. The schooling of the Northland. Neither frontier garrisons nor mountain ramparts that shut away in the Mediterranean coastlands from the Northlands could protect Rome forever. Eventually, the dike was broken. The barbarian invaders flowed through. They came on foot, on horseback, in heavy wagons, tribes of Germans, Slavs, Finns, men, women, children, all crowding assigned some place that sunny Southland. From that had drifted the fabulous tales of life's ease and richness. Rome could not absorb all who came. Rome died, the Christian church lived. Do you see any parallels with our modern world? Yeah. The decline of the empire. And again, uh, I don't know which guy said this, but there was a cynic of Christianity that basically is saying the fall and decline of Rome is happening because you Christians will not join Caesar's legions. To which the retort came back as if more Romans became Christians, we would have no more need for wars. I was like, yeah, nice. Anyways, from the ruins of its homeland, the church sent forth an army of missionaries into town, hamlet, camp to persuade those who had conquered and destroyed that they had not conquered, that there was a more excellent way of life. No one can read the record of these men without being amazed, not only at their heroism, but at their audacity, for they stood up to be conquerors, men who spoke with a sword of tempered iron, and, in another language, actually convinced them of their greatest victory would not come until they had submitted to the very power they imagined that they had vanquished. These pioneering missionaries had left a few records of themselves, and though they were written 12 to 1500 years ago, to us, who know the story of an American frontier only recently left behind, they are very strange, yet very familiar. For they had tell us that the endless forest, somber cold mountains, wild animals, and very simple humans in countries, where today there are paved highways and farmsteads and cities. Here begins the schooling of the Northland. Now, what I'm noticing just as a parody, and there's nothing new under the sun, these people were leaving the cold regions to go south, where it was warm, and now we have people who are in the southern regions that are moving north because, again, they're getting told that this is where you can get better riches, a better lifestyle. Now, with them, they're saying we're having a decline of an empire. And what happens? They weaponize churchianity, right? That's in essence what it was, and said we're going to go forth and conquer you with our Jesuit missionaries. We're going to say, okay, that's technically pagan, but we'll Christianize it and we'll make it a saint. How's that sound as a nice compromise? We get to keep doing what we're basically doing? For now. Okay. After about 100 years, boom, you've been funneled into the church. Nothing really changed. So as opposed to, Catholics just put up statues and they don't get it any better. No, they basically are just saying this is what the pagans were doing. And as time evolves, it's like, well, it's always been there, so what's the problem? See? And now today, we're seeing people going back to weaponizing Christian nationalism to preserve the empire. Oh, yeah. I don't think that was supposed to be on God's No, but we do hear about an antichrist system in Revelation that is going to be incorporating government in order to impose rule upon everybody. So I'm just noticing a little bit of a mirroring going on here of what was then and what's to now. Even before the missionaries brought the ideas of Christian Rome to them, the Germanic peoples had learned a good deal from pagan Rome. The missionaries were aware of this, but they did not know that the Near East had long influenced the Germanic peoples via the Balkans and the Danube Valley. For instance, the masquerading murmurs and even St. Nicholas himself may first have reached the heart of Europe, not from the south, but from the southeast. Nor could the missionaries realize that this influence would continue unbroken, all the while they were striving to convert the pagans of northern Europe. What did the pagan Germans know or believe when the missionaries reached them? They knew that winter followed upon summer, and that spring followed upon winter. That winter was the time when nature's green life died away, except in the evergreens. It was then, they believed, that the spirits of darkness howled across the fields and through the forests, and wrenched at the eaves and broke in the barns and stables. The Germans knew the moods of the earth, air, but little about the habits of the stars. They had no way of measuring the solstice and the equinox until they learned them from the Romans. They were also glad to learn of Rome's Saturnalia. Now, a little side note, when you're reading all the stuff with like Grimm's fairy tales with all those creepy cryptid-like creatures, I listen to a lot of cryptid shows, and I'm not gonna lie, Germany has a lot of freaky, creepy animals out there. So these superstitions that we might just chuckle and be like, "Oh, ha ha ha, superstitious, creepy," I do think there's some merit, but as opposed to having the solution on hand of what you're supposed to do about it, this is perfect way for a druid, witch doctor, some charlatan to fill in the void and say, well, if we do this practice, we do that. You might as well mark it if people are scared because that makes them impulsive. Krampus, yes, that's one of many. One of many. They also have a lot of creepy things that sound similar to werewolves or dogmen, as you might say. Ah, that's so delicious. Anyways, there exists a letter in the year 742 AD in which Saint Boniface, the apostle to the Germans, complains to Pope Zacharias that his labors to convert the heathen Franks and Alamans, the Germanic tribes, were being handicapped by the escapades of the Christian Romans back home. The Franks and the Alamans were on the threshold of becoming Christians, but their conversion was retarded, and that's the word used here, by their enjoyment of their lewd carnivals. When Boniface tried to turn them away from such customs, they argued that they had seen and celebrated under the very shadow of St. Peter's in Rome. Embarrassed and sorry, Pope Zacharias replied to Boniface, admitting that the people in the city of Rome misbehaved very badly at Christmas time. There was very little he could do about it. However, the following year, he succeeded in inducting the Holy Synod of Rome to forbid the Romans under penalty from setting such bad examples. So again, this is a little bit of an irony. A lot of times when we confront somebody and say, well, this has a pagan connotation to it, here's the verses, here's the history, here's some anthropology breaking it down, this connects to Baal, so on and so forth, and what do we hear? I don't do it for those reasons. God knows my heart. So even in the Catholic sense, the guy's going, yeah, well, fair point. I understand you're on the verge of converting them, but we didn't exactly put on a good representational show when they came to the holy city, right? I'm just laughing at the irony because we keep on saying, well, I'm not like them. I'm better than them. I don't do it like that. But you participate in their rituals and or you set a bad example that they're over here saying, well, who are you to tell me what the standard is? Because you're doing the same thing, just in a different town and a little bit different tweaks because of what you have around you. But it's the same thing, right? This is why Christians were supposed to have a little bit of the people ask of the faith that's within you, as we get in 1 Peter 3:15. Supposed to prompt that because there's something different about you. They don't have a testimony here. So good for us, poor for them. Alas for human frailty. The ban had to be repeated over and over for centuries. Out in the Northland, how well did the missionaries succeed? let us look at Christmas in the Middle Ages, particularly in the mid-15th century. Holly, ivy, evergreens were up, candles, torches were lit, and the murmurs clowned in the streets. There were singers, Christmas presents, fortune telling, and much feasting and drinking. The people chose not to mock a king, but a lord of misrule, an abbot of unreason, and the king of the bean, a pope who presided over the feast of the fools, or the feast of the asses. They made him a bald-headed, red-nosed clown. Hmm. And set him on a donkey. Hmm. He had a retinue, and the hobos on a spree. These ancestors of ours squawked an anthem, danced about the donkey, and hide themselves in the church of the cathedral, where they performed a slapstick mass. The choir was vested in tatters and in robes turned inside out. They wore orange peels for spectacle rims. They held their music sheets upside down and jangled a gibberish response to the bishop who read the service. They rang the bells. They hop skipped, jumped through the church. Io Saturnalia, ho, golden age of Kronos. That means time, by the way, and we keep hearing a certain guy say golden age. Hail, Sakia. But it would be unfair to leave the picture this way. As difficult as it was to tame Saturnalia, it was being done. Today the boughs are up. The Christmas dinner is on. The gifts and greeting cards are on the table and the floor. The pageants remain. The carols and the church services. The songs are no less gay, yet their notes are much richer and humbler, for they tell the story of the mother and child who at last found a birthday. And again, interesting with the clown figure symbolism, with Christ also riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Now, granted, we're hearing only this in the 15th century, but where did this custom come from? I honestly do not know. That's a bit of a rhetorical question, but anthropology wise, this doesn't just happen overnight. Something had to inspire it. And a red nose? Is this a Nephilim reference? And by the way, when you ever go on a cruise, what's the name of the ship lines? One of the most popular. Starts with a C.
I don't know.
Yeah. Carnival. Yeah, it's still going. We're still going. I was reading another book. That one's a lot thicker reading, as I've been telling some people. Some of the stuff I'm reading is like, I'm just gonna give them the highlights because this is translated from French into English, and it's really hard to grasp at some points. But one of the things he covers is the Carnival festivals, and made a mention. And I was like, "Ha, that's interesting." Questions. That was the end of that chapter.
So what was their point of this bald-headed man dressed up like a clown? What was their intention for his representation? What do you
Well, for me, it's like they had to have some sort of inspiration for this. Like, again, I think this would. I'm not going to do it now, but if you guys want to do your own little additional homework, I'm pretty sure if you type in even to Google AI, and I know we're just going to jump. Hold on. If you watched Lord of the Rings, you watched AI. If you watched Pirates of the Caribbean, you watched AI. When you typed into Google all your questions prior, it's still the infancy stage of AI. So relax. I'm just saying, if you ask a particular question saying, what was the possible inspiration for the origins of clowns? Ask specifics. Does this have anything to do with Nephilim? Why were they bald? What was the origins of the red nose? Does this have anything to do with McDonald's? I think it does because, eating children, the red shoes. Maybe there's a little truth to the Nephilim look like clowns, and this is part of the reason why we have that genetic installation of all of us of being slightly scared of having that clown phobia. Not every one of us, but some of us still today. Like there's a lady at my church that had that, and I was like, this is a real thing. Yes. Absolutely terrified if she sees a clown face. Why would the inspiration for Joker come about? Right? We don't know, but as well, the red hair on McDonald's. Uh, Nephilim were alleged to have red hair, the giants, right? When they're talking about Ireland, one of the nicknames for Ireland is the Emerald Isles. Emerald tablets? Maybe there's a little Babylon. Canaan. Allegedly, which guy was it? One of the guys I was reading, and I can't remember who at the moment. He made a very interesting case, and his name's in the other room. He said that there is a place on the shores of Ireland that allegedly state that they were on the run from Joshua, son of Nun, blah, 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 and that they'd come from Canaan. Whether or not that's true, I was just going interesting because the Emerald Islands driving the snakes out of Ireland. It's possible because the Phoenicians did migrate to Carthage before Rome sacked that area. They also worship Baal, but they also had a trade route that went to Ireland. And as well, we have that classic little saying, oh, a ginger steals your souls, right? No trust a redhead. Does that have any Nephilim connections? Again, I don't have solid proof. I'm just speculating. I'm not advocating that we have to like ostracize them all or put them on a stake. I'm not advocating that for a second for anybody who's thinking I'm going that route. The thing is, we have these little things that we say in our everyday society, and I'm merely asking speculatively why. Right? And when we look into it, especially now with all this, I'm not saying consult it like a freaking demon. I'm just saying like maybe it'll be able to give you a little bit more specifics. I don't know. That's just my speculation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Millie, are you okay?
I promise I'm okay.
Get her some hot tea. Oh goodness, I love that. Grape juice hits the spot. All right. Next one. Any last questions?
Yeah, I'm good here.
Renee never showed up. Maybe she got
Yeah, she's
traffic. Oh
late.
no, or she forgot. All right. The raging rot of the 12 nights. To the old pagans of northern Europe, the year began with winter. But when they called winter included our late autumn, by October by October or November, the harvest is in. The cattle are bedded down. Sorry. By the way, October means 8, November means 9, December means 10. There's something going on here, but just put that into consideration. It is time to thank the gods for the store of the barn and the stable. Sometimes our harvest is poor. Sometimes we have enough. We seldom have more. Ahead stretch the long months of snow, with barely the feed on hand for the cattle and the swine. It is wiser and thin out the herds now, or risk having all the animals starve later. In late November, therefore, or early December, we must slaughter the extra animals and preserve the meat. Now, this is even another additional thing that I've been contemplating, seeing as the average peasant back in the French Revolution era did not have meat and bread every single day. Like for us today, and I'm saying think of it outside of before you learned all the bad stuff that they put in our food. Getting a burger and a quarter pounder or a burger with potato was not a common staple trope for the average peasant. That was a rare luxury. So I was almost thinking in the fasting sense, maybe the body should have maybe periods of fasting, but maybe even every other day because meat was not supposed to be consumed during the hotter months, that's on a frequent basis, but more so in the winter months. I'm just noticing a little bit of a parody here. Why? Because it's supposed to give you a little bit of fat, right? So that you could actually live out the cold. Whereas the other ones, you're actually trying to lose weight with the hotter season. If that makes any sense. Um, it is a good time to invite friends in for a bit of feasting. But before we begin, we must thank the gods, Thor, Odin, Njord, Frey, and offering them some of the meat too, and by drinking beer or mead to them. And may they grant to our labors in the new year a goodly reward. The god who cared for the fertile herd was Frey, whom Friday is named. His animal symbol was the boar. Even after the pagan gods had passed on, the boar sacrifice was too enjoyable to be forgotten. It still survives in the feast of merry old England, in which the boar is treated as if it were some royal personage. First, the trumpets blow, the door swings open. In marches the platter bearing a steaming boar's head. an apple in its mouth. Behind it tropes a procession of lusty puddings. Now, have you guys ever had boarhead meat?
Yeah.
Where do you think that might possibly stem from? Again, everyday things that we still see today. Where did that actually come from? What was the inspiration? Might I suggest this? As well, before it migrated north, we have that story, allegedly, of Tammuz dying in a boar hunt, right? Or at least he got gored, came home, died. Very similar to Game of Thrones. That story with King Richard before he kicked, or whatever his name is, the first show, not King Richard. Anyways, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But again, it's like, okay, there think there is some merit here. Now, there, like I said, with Tammuz, there's allegedly two stories: is that he died by self-castration and or by the boar. Now, he could have gone through the eunuch phase because he was going a little bit cuckoo. And then his mom said, "You know what? What you need is to go on a hunt because you're kind of driving me crazy in this phase." And he does, comes back home and dies. And or maybe he was going crazy, right? And in a crazy mindset, he's running around. He's saying, "I have to end this. I'm gonna go like my father did." And maybe there's a connection with that. Don't know. All speculation. Guess we'll find out when we watch the reruns in heaven. But thus is my speculation of just saying, where did this boar ceremony came from, right? Cheers and laughter from the spectators poised attack it. Valiant trenchermen, whose ancestors worship Frey, but to whom themselves probably had never heard. This too is Christmas. Wednesday literally means Woden's day, and once Woden was chief among the Northland's gods. And as Germanic gods go, Woden was not very ancient, for he wandered into the beliefs of the people about the time Christ was born. From the Near East, he made his way northward into Scandinavia, where his name was eventually pronounced as Odin. How Odin became chief of the Germanic gods, we do not know for certain. Written records of those days are very few. At any rate, when the Germanics adopted him, they acquired some new and more exalted ideas of what a god could or should be. For gradually Odin grew into a very wise god, who knew everything that was going on in the world. On each of his soldiers perched a sharp-eyed, wage-tongued raven, who flew forward to the ends of the earth and came back to prattle about everything that it saw. Sometimes Odin himself toured the world on his white horse, Sleipnir, who had 8 legs and giving him a greater speed. At other times, Odin preferred a hike, wrapped in a blue cloak and wearing his broad-brimmed hat, carrying his wanderer's staff. Now, I almost wonder if this is kind of a merger between Horus and Hermes, which are both equivalents of Tammuz. I highly suspect that. Again, Wanderer's staff, maybe that has something to do with the Caduceus staff. But as migration goes, like I said, it's like deity telephone. By the time you get all the way over there with the Babel language and everybody's going, okay, I think he said this. That sounds good enough. Very similar, right? The story is very similar, just a little variance. So somebody could, again, they look at my stuff, they'll be like, oh, that's Soto, you're making it up. But as we're hearing now, there's a migrational aspect to this to be considered. The Northmen knew the icy shadow of the Arctic, the rage and gloom of nature far different from the mild winter wind in the blue Mediterranean. In the Northern Europe, eternal vigilance and struggle were the price of safety and shelter. While the scribes of Mesopotamia might feel secure with Marduk as their champion for them, the Norse poet philosophers were driven to believe that even people and gods together could not hold back forever the dark, grim giants of nature. Again, Nephilim, giants, you're praying to these individuals. Again, while we say, oh, they're just stupid, they're praying to a wooden idol and stuff like that, I think Gary Wayne makes some valid case that maybe they could talk at one point if they were imbued with the right thing. I mean, we have the talking trees in The Wizard of Oz. We have the talking tree in Pocahontas. Now, I know we kind of go, ah, that's just fiction. You're crazy. You're trying to make. Was it? That's all I'm saying. And just be open to interpretation. Because again, the frost giants, when they're having all these stories, these people believed in them. And they don't think that they just went away. Now we might say giants, but maybe the demonic aspect of giants, their powers that they still had, but they didn't have the bodies. Maybe that's something that they're inferring. The giants were only biding their time. Some day the uneasy truce between them and the gods would snap. The giants would advance to settle for all time their ancient grudge. Then Odin would be forced to marshal the gods and their allies quickly to meet the day of judgment. For over the fate had already pronounced sentence, who at this time would be the gods' allies. They would be men who had proven on the battlefield that they were worthy to fight under the waning and unyielding banners of the gods, slain warriors whose spirits had been recruited into Valhalla. I kind of have to wonder, is that kind of where we get the origins of soldiers? Soldiers give you freedom. I thought Christ gave us freedom. What, am I worshiping the dead technically if I'm doing that? What? I'm not saying you can't respect a warrior. I can't say you can't tell embellished nice stories about people who did great acts of protecting their loved ones, but to say that, the warrior ethos is how you make it or merit into heaven, Valhalla equivalent, right? That's not what we're supposed to be doing. But in the pagan equivalent, why not? Thus did Odin become god of the warriors. Within a few brief centuries after Odin captured the loyalty of the Northmen, a milder god and a quieter strength and a better hope deposed him. But during those centuries, Odin himself grew into a finer godhood. That is why he never really faded out, and why he comes into our Christmas story. Although he never ceased to be the leader of the armed and wild hosts, he rose in mildness and a concern for humankind. Even before they were converted to the religion of Christ, the Germanic peoples heard rumors of garbled tales about it, and some of the things that they had heard and thought they understood were transferred and imposed upon the legend of their Odin. Perhaps this explains and began calling Odin the All-Father, why they made him chief god in a pagan trinity of their own. A trinity that much of the creator became the creator of humankind. Moreover, they told a story about how Odin once made himself a sacrifice. For 9 nights, the Germanics counted time by nights rather than by days. He dedicated himself by hanging on a tree, pierced by a spear, which may recall one who hung upon a cross until the 9th hour. At the end of that time, Odin received a drink of mead. Then he cried out the letters of the Northmen's alphabet, the runes. Thus they believed was writing invented. To the Northmen, these scars could be scratched on wood or stone, so that forever afterward they could speak silently to whoever was versed in their mystery, who, were no less than a revelation, one which only a god could capture, and only by submitting to a great and deep pain. Because Odin saw all with his one eye, and knew all, and wished for the world well, he grew to be a just god. At times, he even became gruffly kind. And that just jumped way too far. Come on. He seemed to move everywhere in the daily affairs of people. But though he increased in stature, he did not grow away from the more ancient guises. The German not pronouncing that word, but translates to the rider of the white horse. Old, not pronouncing that word, flapping hat and wide awake. Still rides the storms on his white horse, wearing his hat and fluttering mantle. In Scandinavia, they still say Odin jagar forbi. Odin is riding past. But his rout of warriors recruited into Valhalla against the final judgment battle have ceased to be fancied as warriors. They now have become demons and executed criminals. Wodinness, Wodinness, her here, Wodinness, her means Wodinness army. But people who no longer knew what this meant in his twisted 10 days here, a phrase that still lives and which we translate as raging rout. The raging rout arise about the time of Halloween to stay in the country throughout the winter. It becomes the Woden at the head, or in the Harridan named Holda perchta birchtel. If the rout comes as a soft wind, the next year will be goodly. If the rout comes as a raging, the year will be hapless and full of warfare. It is a season when fortunes are revealed and the visitors are waited anxiously. Wagon and plow must be hidden. The women hasten to finish their spinning, that the staff may be empty, that the wheel at rest, and a fair stock of yard laid by. If it is Perchta who comes, she inspects the household on the night of St. Nicholas, December 6th, and is that today? Ha ha! that she that she may grant her approval to the record of the house, for Perchta is stern and punishes the lazy. In America, the witches of Halloween have turned into small and every human pranksters, but in the countryside of Europe, the raging rout remains much more formidable. Over there, we find clowns and buffoons who are full grown fellows out of the plenty rough horseplay. The farmer does well to hide his wagon and plow and everything else that might be a handle for mischief. As we trace the routes of Woden and struck his life of the Germanic peoples, we find him turning up in the most unexpected places. For instance, in another word I can't pronounce, the great German epic of the 12th century, he has shrunk to the stature of a legendary king and a land no longer pagan. Again, he has merged into the legend of the great king who has never dies but now sleeps inside a mountain. Another Nephilim possible reference. While the ravens fly about outside. A king who will wake up someday when his nation needs his help to fight off the enemy. Of most interest to us, however, is the fact that Woden has become Santa Claus, or he is more accurately called St. Nicholas. It is obvious then that Woden has become an amazing capacity for becoming someone else, or for merging with someone else to make a new person, born again. In Europe, in contrast to America, St. Nicholas wears a broad brimmed hat and rides his faithful old white horse. His comrades have now dwindled to four: his brother, Rupert, who goes along with a switch to take care of children who do not deserve what St. Nicholas has in his bag, the Christ child, St. Peter, and an angel. When he enters the house, he sits down and gives the children something of an examination. Have they learned their lessons, their proper prayers? Have they done their errands cheerfully? If they pass, he rewards them from his pack. In some places in Europe, he does not come on Christmas Eve, as he does come in America, but on the eve of December 6th. But who was the real St. Nicholas? You notice the white horse reference? I was immediately thinking of Christ's return with that.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Uh-huh. Thoughts?
I mean, I've definitely heard comparisons of Odin being basically like origins of Saint Nick. So yeah,
We're having
that's
influences therein, yeah.
yeah, for
I was just
sure.
watching like if you guys follow me on Instagram, I posted the Adam ruins everything. And I don't find it a coincidence man ruins everything. But he was breaking down Christmas origins, and the prank aspect of Trick or Treat was also affiliated with Christmas. And as I was reading this, I was going, interesting. It's not that far apart. I mean, granted, we might have just dropped it for one aspect. We just said, okay, we're going to bump that and reserve it solely to Halloween and, cut it off from Christmas. But the aspect was interfused with Saturnalia festivals and festivities. I was like, well, that's just
Mhm.
lovely. And it does check out in this book here.
Interesting.
You got anything, Millie? Tissue?
No, no, I don't. I've also heard about Odin being associated with Santa Claus. And yeah, him and I'll make jokes when we go out. We'll be somewhere and we'll see Santa Claus and be like, "Oh, look, it's Odin." Or something like that. So I've definitely heard this little yeah, this idea before.
It's very interesting to me. The you could say I'm wrong, but like a lot of stuff that I'm reading with these anthropologists and you start seeing the history, you see the migration occurring. Now, it might be 100, it might be 50 years after whatever something said, but eventually something becomes a custom, and then everybody's just like, okay, this is what we've been doing. How long have we been doing this? Who cares? It's fun. Eat, drink, and be merry and forget about yesterday or whatever. Kind of is what emerged from a lot of this, is what I just noted. But anything else? Cool. Want me to keep going? The Google. The Google. The Google. All right. Anyways, the Google says the practice of leaving offerings to Odin's horse, Sleipnir, is
Oh,
compared to
yeah.
the modern traditions of milk and cookies. Yes.
Oh.
Ha ha.
Interesting.
Wait. Would you feed a horse milk and cookies?
I hope not.
Well, it's made of a lot of it's made of grain. They are allowed to have little cubes of sugar. I'm just saying, oatmeal cookies I think would be okay for a horse, but I don't know. My mom worked at the horse farm, and they had four colts in the pasture at one point, and one of them, she thought she was a dog. But I would go in the pasture, I could lay down and I could lean up next to her. So like she would lay down next to me. It was great. I called her Sheila, and she was always trying to nibble at my fingers. I'm like, I don't have any food for you. They had to put her down, but I brought her a carrot that day. It's very sad, sad parting. I didn't like that. It was sad.
Yeah.
Now I'm sad. Good night, everyone. Okay. All right, we can start this after one more sip. Okay. God into saint. We know almost nothing about the man who day, sorry, who someday was to become Saint Nicholas. He lived during the reigns of the Roman emperors of Diocletian, Maximilian, and Constantine, late in the 3rd century and into the 4th. His parents were well-to-do Christians in the province of Asia Minor. When he was still a young man, Nicholas was consecrated Archbishop of Myra, the seaport town, and he died in 326 AD on December 6. He must have been a remarkable person, judging by the varied and numerous legends that had been gathered about his life on earth and his life as a saint after his death. In the last 100 years or so, he has branched out in Europe into new territory. Until now, he has adopted all the children of the United States. But while his job in America occupies his time only once a year across the ocean, his work lasts all the year around. In fact, he is probably the hardest working saint of all. It would take volumes to tell all of his deeds and adventures from one end of Europe to the other. From England to Greece to Russia, he rides the storm at sea, saving the lives of sailors for whom he is the last and only help. In days gone by, neither Greek nor Russian mariners would weigh anchor without an icon of St. Nicholas in the forecastle. The Venetian sailors, inbound and outbound, always stopped at a island outside the city to invoke and thank him. His churches dot the coast of England, almost 400 of them, more in number even than those of England's patron, St. George. Far from the sea, the Balkan Slavs know him as the rescuer of ships, and on his day they prepare carp in a special recipe. When he comes riding on his wings, the storm dies. There is a folk song in the Serbians and Bulgarians that says that once all the saints gathered to drink wine on a pleasant little social occasion, Saint Basil went around with a golden jug, and each saint filled his golden cup. They talked away, but St. Nicholas began to nod, and his cup tilted in his hand. All the saints stopped to watch him. St. John asked, Brother Nicholas, why are you dozing with a cup in your hand? And St. Nicholas roused himself and replied, St. John, since you ask, the enemy had raised a terrible storm in the Aegean Sea. So, while my buddy dozed here, my spirit was off to rescue all the ships and bring them to shore. By saving ships at sea, St. Nicholas saves the landlubber merchants who are their passengers. Therefore, since he protects the merchants at sea, surely he protects them on land as well. By this reasoning, he becomes the patron saint of travelers everywhere, protecting their goods and ensuring them with safe passage. See anything with the marketing aspect of what we do every year? And it says in Revelation 18:23 that the nations were deceived by the merchants. Yeah, there's going to be a connotation there, I'm sure. Even pirates, being sailors, claimed his protection. Moreover, if he was the master of the storm, then surely he could bring on as well the cause it to abate. In fact, some have studied that St. Nicholas stories believe that the same beliefs of the Roman and Greek sailors held about their gods of the sea, Neptune and Poseidon, have been transferred by Christian sailors on St. Nicholas. He is a special saint of numerous places, particularly in Russia. The Russians adopted him when, almost 1,000 years ago, they became Christianized. When St. Nicholas has tremendous energy, he has traveled northward across all of Russia and overleaped the frontiers of Christianity itself, but become the helper of the pagan Samoyed and the Laplanders, the people of the reindeer, the fishermen, the Arctic Ocean. In America, we tend to believe that the Arctic is this one and only residence. St. Nicholas is the protector of all humble and small folk. He is a special guardian of unmarried girls. Legend says that while St. Nicholas was still a young man, his parents died and left him two things: a substantial fortune and a strange and impractical conscience. The scriptures say, "When thou dost alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret." Nicholas found himself faced with the problem of giving his fortune to the needy without letting them know whence it came. However, he had been solving it very well when, one day, he chanced to be passing a house of a nobleman, a widower. This man had three marriageable daughters, but no longer anything from which to feed and clothe them, much less a dowry for each of them. And without dowries, no one would marry them. The times were desperate, and there seemed no other solution than to sell the girls one by one into slavery. Nicholas overheard the father and daughters lamenting together. Of his one great fortunes he still had 3 bags of gold left. That night he returned to the nobleman's house with one of his bags, and dropped it through a small window. Thus it came about that the eldest daughter found a husband. Soon it was the turn of the second daughter. Again Nicholas slipped a bag of gold through the window in the dead of night, and thus won her a husband. The father now expected apparently that all the goods come in threes, for this time he hid himself in ambush. Nicholas indeed did appear in the night with his third bag of gold and tossed it into the room through the little window. Then he fled. The father ran after him and caught hold of his clothes and threw himself on his knees. "O Nicholas, servant of God," he cried, "why hide all these good deeds?" But Nicholas enjoined him to tell no one. Once after Nicholas had become archbishop, a nobleman sent his young son on a long journey to Myra, so that Nicholas might give them his blessing. On the way, they stopped overnight at a hostelry. While they slept in the innkeeper stole into their room and murdered them and stripped them of their money and their goods. But God sent word to Nicholas in a vision, and he arose quickly and sought out the innkeeper and confronted him in his crimes. The innkeeper was terrified. He fell at the archbishop's feet and implored him to forgive him. So Nicholas prayed, and God raised up the boys to life again. These two legends reveal to us something of a figure who one day became Santa Claus. For here we see him as the protector of children and of the helpless young girls. He had already developed the habit of slipping gifts into the homes of the worthy people in the dark of night. But the lore of the common folks is also prone to take the most unexpected turns. Nicholas the saint is often pictured with 3 bags of gold, but usually these bags have taken the shape of 3 balls. After the merchants had adopted him as watch and ward over their worldly goods, the 3 golden dowries of the nobleman's daughters became the symbol of the pawnbroker. A man's goods, that is, are safe under the sign of St. Nicholas. The schools of the Middle Ages were connected with monasteries. There, the boys were encouraged by their teachers to act plays and pageants about the life of the saint who was fond of them. The boys took their parts very seriously. Early in the 10th century, the King of Germany, Conrad I, tells of visiting the monastery while the boys were in the midst of a St. Nicholas celebration. They were the Bishop Nicholas and his churchly retinue, filing solemnly up the aisle of the church. The king was much amused, and he told his followers to toss apples to them. But the earnest procession never swerved, passed on, and the apples lay where they had fallen. Eventually, the processions by which the school boys honored their patron saint on this day moved out of the monasteries into the streets of the cities. On December 6th, the children chose a boy bishop and constituted themselves in retinue. They trooped through the neighborhood collecting the tribute of the boroughs, in the cathedral, where their bishop actually entered the chancel, took part in the real church service, and even delivered a sermon. The children's revel lasted until December 28th, the Holy Innocents, the day of commemorating King Herod's slaughter of all the infant boys in Judea, after the wise men had told him that a new king had been born in his country. That's interesting. This broad pageantry has faded over the years, and not much more remains than the customs for the children to roam about with switches, levying their tribute from house to house. Yet, we are not as far from the days of the full pageant as we might think. In Austria, for instance, St. Nicholas appears on this day, traveling about his robes and mitre. I think that's the cap, right? Or is that mitre? Mitre? Certainly not in the familiar scarlet jacket and breeches with the white fleece trimmings. And this is how a god turns into a saint. Both Woden and St. Nicholas are travelers of the road. They wander afoot and upon horseback, inspecting the deeds of humankind, making sure the right in order to prevail. They do this when the days of the year are the shortest, when a new year is on its way, when the fortunes of the future are to be cast. Both of them ride the storm. They can subdue it and they can rouse it, and they ended by becoming one and the same person. So when the children of the lower Rhineland, of both sides of the Dutch German border, set out their clogs for the Saint class, and that's spelled Santeklas, there are many versions of the name St. Nicholas to fill on the eve. Not December 25th, but December 6th. They put hay in them for the white horse, and their parents set a sheaf of grain. Woden's horse and Nicholas's is all one. Sometimes instead of clogs, they set out the little wooden ships in honor of the mariner saint. But clogs or ships, they always place them by the chimney, for this saint through many centuries has preferred to deliver his presence secretly in night. I find that interesting. I was immediately starting to think of the Julie Andrews song. The ships come in, Christmas Day in the morning. Sorry, the ships aspect is just like kicking in hard there. Questions for the recap.
Hmm.
More from the Goog. Ooh, I like that. Nice abbreviation. I learned it from the Goog. Ooh. Actually, kind of. I'm thinking fantasy immediately. She's making me laugh. Thank you, Melissa. The concept of the moral judgment, Santa knowing who has been naughty or nice, echoes Odin's omniscience. Omniscience. As he was served by ravens that reported all human deeds to him. I call them snitches. So that would be funny. Snitches get stitches and have like a raven and like an arm sling or something like that. And, sorry, sorry, bad joke. Anyways, you guys have anything?
Um,
All right, want to do one more or?
yeah,
All right, my time is your time.
yeah, we can do another one.
Cool. Let's see. We're on page 75. There's only 103 pages total. That's how small the chapters are.
Yeah.
One more. Instead of receiving ravens, we receive coal. Yeah, I don't like that. Actually, I never gotten coal. I've never gotten presents. No, kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Um, I'm not even on the list. I'm on the FBI's list. No, that's got to be a T-shirt right there. I got to come up with something. I'm on the naughty list and have something with like the FBI or something like that. That would
Yeah,
be funny.
that'd be funny.
The only list I'm on is the FBI's. Anyways, green is our shield. When the harvest has been laid away and brown death has driven off the summer's green, and the nightly frosts lay a brittle lace over the countryside, and the white snow brings back us to the foothills of the Arctic, then the raging rout comes riding. There is no defense against it in the living green of summer. Box, bay, ivy, holly, yew, large, juniper, pine, spruce, fir, all are shields against the witches and demons. The spines of the holly leaves become thickets to catch and hold the hags. Juniper smoke is the demon-chasing incense. In the Tyrol, for instance, even city people smoke misfortune out of their houses while the farmer carries smoldering sprigs in a brazier, along with a bowl of holy water, into every room and crevice, into the stalls of the cattle, onto the threshing floor. Every animal is censed and besprinkled, so too the beds of the girls and the doors of their chambers. As the houseman makes his rounds, he keeps saying, "In with the good luck, out with the bad." Finally, all the people of the household gather in a circle, and each receives from the master a smoke blessing. Huh. There's got to be something with that, I would imagine. What's the smoke connotation here? Anyways, all the Northland cherishes the greens that do not die. Against the feast of Christmas, every man's house, as also their parish churches, were decked with holly, ivy, bay, and whatsoever the season of the year afforded to be green. The conduits and standards in the streets were likewise garnished. According to John Stowe's The Survey of London, which Shuts was the city of the 15th century. Weapons against the weird and ghostly vermin were not only greenery, evergreen incense and lights, but noise, shouts, horns, bells, even banging guns, especially on New Year's Day. During the 12 days of Christmas, or the 12 nights, if we reckon in the old Germanic way, you must avoid heavy work as much as possible, lest you be tripped up by one of these invisible evil wishers. And you must not eat peas or beans. On the other hand, a broom a day sweeps the witches away. So bind a new broom on each of the 12. As in Rome and Babylon, the 12 days are full of augury for the 12 months of the coming year. To each of the 12 days, its month of the same order, you may learn what the weather and the growing season are going to do by noting the sun, wind, rain, and snow on each of the 12 days. You may also learn your own fortune for the year if you go through the proper magic arts. The green boughs can bring you luck, too, if someone switches you with them. Thus, it is a good time among the Slavs as well as Germanics for the children to collect gifts from the neighbors by going around and switching them with green bows and reciting a good luck ditties. Why do the winter demons fear the greens? Green belongs to the realm of summer and life. Winter kills most of the summer's train, but the greens remain steadfast. Where the greens are, it is also where the winter is. They are the enemies of winter's white death. Although Christ's Mass covers 12 days, strictly speaking, the power of the winter's demons remains until Candlemas, February 2nd. By that time, the days are lengthening, the sun endures longer, and the winter has allowed many demons to find shelter in the nooks and crannies of the house. Only a continuous struggle with lights and greenery and incense has kept them within bounds. And now the spring is about to begin, and none of these wintry denizens must be allowed to overstay to spoil the early sprouts. Therefore, on Candlemas, many candles are brought to blaze at the demons, and the people bear these lights in a great procession. I find that quite interesting. Like it's making me think, and I know for them, sometimes witches were seen as more like herbalists, right? But it's like we don't we don't want witches because they're going to have the capacity to wield these dark demonic spirits at us, but at the same time we're practicing rituals and superstitions to keep away these. It's like
Yeah, right.
so bad witch, good witch. Again, this is where the whole argument goes into. There's no such thing as that if you're going by God's word, but if you're going by their stuff, it seems like it's could be haggled out, as it were.
Mhm.
Anyways, that was the end of that chapter. Questions, recap. How when we lost Millie?
She's
Ah!
like, she's listening. Yeah, I thought that was interesting as far as when he started talking about the color green,
Yeah.
right towards the end there. Yeah, I think that was kind of interesting. Almost like they're hiding around the house and just like searching for anything that's alive during the season.
Well, allegedly, um, I think it's in China. I'm not sure if they're still doing it to this day, but they have a thing where they put mirrors like in front of a door. So when you come in, where when the demon wants to enter, they'll see their face and they're like, ah, gadzooks, I'm out. Same thing with putting gourds with creepy faces on it around Halloween. That had a connotation with that. Um, for me, when I'm listening to a lot of these cryptid stories and other things where like supernatural things are happening in people's houses, the common thing I hear is, "Oh, we started burning sage, we did rituals, we blah 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 blah." Do these things happen? Oh, I bet you 10 to 1 they do. I've had some creepy things happen in this place once in a blue moon, but I'm over here like angels are playing, and angels and demons are having a John Wick fight, and I'm over here just eating a bag of potato chips, watching a movie. Like, what do I know? There's some creepy things have happened. So I'm seeing this as like, yes, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but the dark spirits are looking for hosts. I think that's the takeaway here. And in the ancient world, where we're laughing at how their petty rituals weren't going to stop anything, um, I think there's something to be weighed there is that they knew that some things were still out there that had power. And while we chuckle and laugh and say this is just superstition, creepy, or whatever holidays and rituals that you guys are performing, there's a reason for that. Whether that is subconsciously installed or the tradition is because we have seen this before, right? And we want to prevent that from ever happening again. Now, as opposed to turning to Christ, they're looking to other alternatives. But again, I think we need to weigh that because now we're still doing it in the holiday sense. We're not even asking ourselves, why are we doing this? This connects to a pagan ritual that is about superstition, right? And when you're reading the thing in Jeremiah, because everybody's saying, read things in context. Well, they're telling me that. I'm saying, okay, your wife still puts up Christmas trees, but you seem to ignore Jeremiah 10, 1 through 5. Okay, now we're going to say you're making things out of context. We're talking about decorating a Christmas tree, nailing it down so it doesn't totter, and decorating it. And it says, do not be like the pagans who look to the stars, could be angels equivalent, and are in awe and wonder of them. Ashtaroth, astrology. Taking a guess here. And we're hearing this thing where you can predict your future around the holidays, right? And they're basing all this stuff off of the lunar calendar. The term lunatic came off of this. People who are obsessed with the moon or went crazy around the moon time. So, anyways, that was a bit ranty, but any recaps? Millie, you're giving me a face like a college student in class like this guy.
No, no, I liked all the chapters that you read us tonight. I did.
It's all good. And I could stop and then I would like to finish, if possible, like next weekend, if you guys have time, because I'd like to have it kind of all before
Yeah,
Christmas.
for Christmas. Yeah.
We would have 83 to 103 for next time, or read one more now, and then we'll read the rest later. It's about the tree. So, when you guys, would you be available next week? You want to stop now? My time is your time.
Yeah, we can
They're the
stop
ones
now.
paying for the show, folks.
Yeah, we can stop now and save it for
Okay,
next
okay,
week if
cool, cool.
anybody's available.
You okay with that, Melissa? What's the goog say?
What's the goose?
What's the
You know,
goog?
I'm sure if you looked into it, you would find some sort of creepy connotation of a goog. That just sounds like a freaking movie
Yeah.
horror monster.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you guys for that good goog is goog is good. I want a shirt. Sorry, she's making me laugh. Anyways, um, so anything else you guys got?
Yeah, I think that's everything.
Cool beans. All right, Melissa, I'm gonna assume you don't have anything because you got goog, so you're goog to go. Great talk. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Like I said, this is for Patreon supporters. We kind of vary on topics. We don't exactly designate anything on a specific topic. We just go into whatever everybody else wants to talk about. We kind of landed on a book reading and chit chat. Not necessarily full on Bible study, but I think it's insightful because it does connect with our Bibles. And as Millie has said before, this is hopefully prompting you to want to examine your Bible a little bit more, as opposed to like, okay, this is just something Baal, Ashtaroth, whatever, chuck it to the side, silly Israel. It's more of a, oh crap, are we still doing that today? And when you do tell people they are, they get kind of mad at you. But as I said before, this page, Ministry Podcast, is all funded by you guys. I cannot thank these individuals enough because they literally helped me get by for another month. And that is literally how we're living. But that is all thanks to people who have supported both with Patreon, PayPal, Cashapp. So thank you guys for doing that. You can find me on Mana Daily Podcast, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube. And I think that's everything. And until next time, folks, I will catch you all on the next one.